Hi, everybody. It is Peter Schiff. It is Friday, October 11th, 2013. Well, it looks like the curtain is about to come down on the political theater in Washington, D.C. But as I said all along, it's just one big show. Okay? Every time we have one of these debt ceiling debates, every time there's been a government shutdown, of course, there hasn't been one recently, but nothing ever changes. They raise the expectations that there might be some kind of grand bargain, but there never is. And of course, they manufacture a crisis. And then the government saves us from the manufactured crisis, and everybody congratulates themselves for setting aside their own partisan gain and working for the American people. The script was written on this long before Americans sat down at their seats for the show. What it looks like is that the Republicans, as I predicted, are going to cave, pretty much fold, and give the president what he wants, which is a clean increase in the debt ceiling and a resolution that funds the government, including Obamacare. And it seems to me that that is what we're going to get. That's what I think the conciliatory statements that we got on Thursday from Boehner basically boils down to. And even though they're also bargaining about, well, maybe we'll just raise the debt limit for a few weeks, once you agree to do that, you've pretty much shown your hand. I mean, you don't want to give up your under no circumstances, which they never even had. I mean, what they were asking for wasn't even enough. But the minute they said they were willing to raise it temporarily, that's it. You have no more bargaining chips. You're pretty much caved in, and that is what is going to happen. But, I think it's actually going to be worse. Not only do I think we're going to get an increase in the debt ceiling and a resumption of the government shutdown, a startup, although, in many cases, we have more government during the shutdown than we did before the shutdown, which makes no sense to me. But hey, that's how a government works. But I think we're going to get not only an increase in the debt ceiling, not only more government, but I think they're going to go back and restore a lot of the cuts that we got from the sequester. As tiny as those cuts were, that was the only thing we gained out of the last deficit reduction, and I bet we're going to give it all back this time around. Of course, the media is going to portray this as a victory for the American public because we averted the government shutdown. We averted default that was going to come if we didn't raise the debt ceiling. And that was never the crisis. The stock market had this correction, which probably would have happened anyway if you just look at a chart. I don't think it was because of the debt ceiling debate or the shutdown. These two things were happening concurrent with one another. But the media in Wall Street managed to convince everybody that that was the only reason the market was going down, which of course puts more pressure on the Republicans to cave because now their stance is being blamed for the market going down, which is why we've had this huge rally in the stock market over the last couple of days on news that this bomb has been diffused, that this so-called crisis has been averted. And now, even though the stock market may be rallying based on the end of this crisis, that's not why it went down. But again, what the government is trying to do, especially with these high-profile things that the government decides to shut down, which are really just a way to inflict pain on American citizens by denying them some of the few things that we get from government, some of the few services, while of course we're still paying for all those services. They didn't shut down the taxes, just supposedly some of the benefits that our tax dollars are buying. But it's all designed to create this phony crisis of less government. Remember, this was all about more government. The so-called crisis was that we couldn't grow government as fast as we had been in the past. And so the government wants us to perceive that less government is a crisis, that if we can't go deeper into debt, that is the crisis. That's not the crisis. The crisis is the debt. The problem wasn't the debt ceiling, but the debt that the ceiling was supposed to contain. The only thing that stands between America and more debt is that ceiling. And that's why President Obama wants to raise the ceiling because he wants more debt. When the government says it's about paying our bills, he is lying. It's not about paying bills. It's about not paying bills. We never pay our bills. That's why we're almost $17 trillion in debt. And what the president wants to do is raise the debt ceiling yet again so we can build that stack of unpaid bills even higher. And when the president says raising the debt ceiling isn't raising the debt, it just lets us pay for stuff, again, it's a lie. We only pay for stuff in the sense that we put it on a credit card. We pay for it by increasing the debt. If we don't raise the debt ceiling, we can't increase the debt. We actually have to pay our bills. That was the crisis. If we didn't raise the debt ceiling, or if we don't raise the debt ceiling, then we've got to pay our bills. But because the bills are so enormous, we're going to have to be honest with the people who we've made promises to and selectively figure out who to pay and who not to pay. But because we don't want to make any of those hard choices, because we don't want to admit the obvious, we want to raise the debt ceiling so we can go on pretending that we pay our bills as we rack up more and more debt. Eventually, of course, the lenders in this transaction are going to wake up to reality. We've just threatened to default. Okay, we didn't do it, but we're going to. What did we tell the bondholders? We will default if we can't go deeper into debt. And we're not willing to prioritize interest payments on the debt. We're not necessarily going to cut Social Security. We're not going to cut government pensions. We're not going to cut military spending. We're certainly not going to raise taxes in order to pay our obligations. So as long as we have some extra money we can borrow, then we'll pay off our bonds. But the minute we get into tough times, we're going to default. So default's inevitable. The bondholders should know this. Just because we raise the debt ceiling and agree to go deeper into debt, that doesn't solve the problem. But you know, what's probably the biggest irony in the whole thing is Goldman Sachs' call on Wednesday. Now, maybe it was coincidental that it came out on Wednesday, or maybe they have some friends in the Republican Party who told them what they were going to do so they can time it. But on Wednesday, Goldman Sachs came out and said that gold is a slam dunk sell as soon as the government resolves this debt ceiling crisis and the government shutdown, right? Because after all, gold is a safe haven. When you're worried about political uncertainty or instability, you buy gold. And the crisis everybody is worried about now is the debt ceiling not being raised and the government shutdown not being resolved. This is the crisis. People must be buying gold because they're worried about the government not raising the debt ceiling. And Goldman Sachs is saying, so when the crisis is averted, when we do raise the debt ceiling, when we start the government back up, gold's a slam dunk to go down to at least 1,000. And you know, so far, right, as they usually do in the early stages, Goldman looks to be very prescient because gold has dropped better than $50 since that statement on Wednesday. And think about this, though. This type of crisis, right, not raising the debt ceiling, that is not why somebody's going to buy gold. Not raising the debt ceiling would be bearish for gold. Why? Because if the debt ceiling is not raised, that means the government can't go deeper into debt. That means government spending has to be slashed. Right? That would also bring the U.S. into a badly needed and way overdue recession where we tried to purge the imbalances from the economy that were created by years and years of artificially low interest rates and continuous debt accumulation. So we would have a deflationary collapse, right? We would have fiscal responsibility. We would have lots of cuts in government spending. Why is any of that bullish for gold? That's bearish for gold. Gold prices would come down. Now, I think gold prices might come down less than stock prices or real estate prices in that environment, but they would still come down. You see, what's bullish for gold is ending that crisis. What's bullish for gold is raising the debt ceiling, not leaving it in place. Raising the debt ceiling clears a path for more government. It means the government can keep on growing. We can keep on borrowing. The Fed can keep on printing money. We can keep on creating inflation. So more government, more debt, and more inflation, That's bullish for gold. How could Goldman Sachs think that's bearish for gold? How can anybody think that that is bearish for gold? We've been raising the debt ceiling many times for the last 12 years. Gold's gone from under $300 an ounce to it hit a high of almost $1,900 at one point because we kept increasing the debt ceiling. Had we never increased it, gold wouldn't have had that spectacular rally. So I think the smart money is fading this Goldman call. I mean, maybe the smart money includes Goldman itself. Maybe Goldman Sachs realizes what I'm saying, and they wanted to load up on gold after they raised the debt ceiling, or once people knew they were going to. And so that's why they came out with this call to kind of flush out some of the weak sellers so that they could buy more gold cheap. I have no idea if that's what they're planning on doing. If they're smart, that's what they're planning. I hope they don't buy any gold. I'd like to see Goldman Sachs short gold and have to cover their short position at a loss. But, you know, gold has been ignoring all of the bullish implications of this crisis. Gold's ignoring all the good news, all the bullish news. Now, we haven't had a lot of economic data this week. We didn't get the jobs numbers. We didn't get the trade numbers because of the government shutdown. My guess is those numbers would have been disappointing, particularly the jobs numbers, and that might have been bullish for gold, but who knows, the market might have ignored it. You know, the gold market also ignored the confirmation by President Obama this week that Janet Yellen is going to be the next chairman or Madam Chairman or chairperson. I'm not sure how we address her, but she's going to chair the Federal Reserve. And that is extremely bullish for gold. Now, I guess it wasn't new because it was pretty much a foregone conclusion ever since Larry Summers dropped out of the race that Yellen was going to get the nod. But remember, I was in Yellen's camp long before Larry Summers dropped out. I always maintained that I thought it would be Yellen. And the reason was because I thought Yellen was the worst possible choice. And so I was confident that the president would make the worst possible choice, and my confidence has been validated because that is exactly what he did. So there wasn't a surprise there. But Yellen, at the head of the Fed, is very bullish for gold. Now, one of the things that really bothers me about the Yellen appointment or nomination is the way the left-wing media is trying to rewrite history and spin it so that you would think that Janet Yellen was somehow warning about the housing bubble in 2005 and 2006, that she was worried about a financial crisis, that her warnings were unheeded by her colleagues at the Fed, that she was some kind of Cassandra sounding the alarm while nobody else cared. Right? This is how the media is trying to cast Janet Yellen. All of it is a fiction. It's completely made up. Janet Yellen was just as clueless as everybody else at the Fed in 2005, 6, 7, all the way up to the collapse in 2008. She was completely blindsided by that. In fact, she admitted it herself that she had no idea that anything like that was going to happen in 2010. But I actually went back to the speeches she made in 05 and 06 that supposedly, these are the supposed speeches where she warned about the housing crisis. She did no such thing. In fact, not only did she not warn about it, the only reason she brought it up was to say there was nothing to worry about. She talked about concerns that other people had, not her, and then she explained why those concerns were misplaced and why the economy was fine, the fundamentals were fine, it was going to keep on growing, and housing prices would keep going up. That's the real Janet Yellen, not the phony Janet Yellen that the media is portraying her to be. But I am doing a special Schiff Report video blog in which I'm going to specifically go over what Janet Yellen said and did not say in 2005 and 2006 and show that the media is making this up, that she didn't predict anything, she had no idea, and besides, she is a real die-in-the-wool Keynesian. She's been far to the left her entire career, which is defined by academia, Harvard, Yale, Berkeley. She worked at the San Francisco Fed or ran that. She's a policy wonk to the left extreme. And so she is going to cling to this failed socialist Keynesian, QE doctrine to the bitter end. it's going to take her a long time to ever admit that everything she studied for her entire life is wrong, that she's completely clueless. So she is going to hold on to this. In fact, the Fed, if you remember, the initial mandate of the Fed was price stability. Now, I mean, that's out the window. Now the mandate is inflation that's not too low. But one of their mandates has to do with inflation. The other one is employment. And there are a lot of people that think that there should just be a single mandate, right? Which would include me. They shouldn't even be looking at employment. I think Janet Yellen is going to bring the Fed back to a single mandate, only the wrong one. She's going to totally forget about the inflation or price stability mandate. She's going to focus entirely on employment, as if she has the ability as Fed chairman to do anything about employment. Certainly, she can't create jobs by creating money, but she's going to give it a try. She's going to create as much money as she can to try to create jobs. The problem is, the more money she creates, the more jobs she's going to destroy. And what's worse, she's going to destroy the purchasing power of the jobs that remain. So we're all going to be poorer as a result of Janet Yellen. And I know, the women's movement is very excited to have Janet Yellen because she's going to be the first woman to head the Fed in 100-year its history. And I think that's unfortunate for the women's movement to have their standard bearer be Janet Yellen, at this particular time in history. It would almost be like if the captain of the Titanic had been a woman, and this was the first woman to ever captain a ship. And there was a lot of news stories and press were making a big deal about the maiden voyage of the Titanic, the first time we had a woman at the helm, and then it sank. It would really probably set the women's movement back quite a bit. And so, I think that it would hit the fan regardless, even if it was somebody else. It's just unfortunate, I guess, for the women that it's this first woman chairman that's going to be at the helm of this ship when it goes down. But it doesn't mean that it wouldn't go down if they had, put Summers in there, for example, and he'd been a man. It's just unfortunate that she's going to be there. But it's her ideology, what she's going to do. I mean, the potential for a hyperinflationary outcome rather than a deflationary collapse is increased. Those odds are increased with Yellen. And, maybe the one person that can be happy about the appointment, truly happy, is Ben Bernanke. Because you see, now he knows that Janet Yellen is going to let him off the hook. He's going to get out of Dodge. Ben Bernanke is not going to go down in history as the worst Fed chairman we ever had. See, now that honor goes to Janet Yellen. So Ben Bernanke can breathe a sigh of the relief, maybe the same sigh that Greenspan breathed when he realized that Bernanke was taking the baton from him. And so Bernanke would have been the worst chairman, except the crisis got postponed a little bit. And maybe that's thanks to the European crisis. But now Ben Bernanke is getting out of Dodge, and now it falls on Janet Yellen. I don't think there's going to be anybody left for Janet Yellen to pass the baton to. I think she is stuck with it. Hey, that's it for now. Everybody have a good holiday weekend. We've got Columbus Day on Monday. And again, watch out for my video blog coming up to completely disprove the nonsense about Janet Yellen, the one person at the Fed warning about the housing bubble and the financial crisis. And again, don't forget to keep listening to my radio show at shiftradio.com, the live show Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to noon, or listen for free anytime you want at shiftradio.com. Bye for now.